space that actually people can come, be with other people who are service users, gain experience, share their experience, actually have somewhere that they can actually be that isn't a hospital, that isn't just a general place where they feel comfortable. And we've got permission for landlords to do it as effectively a gallery cafe rather than calling it a drop-in centre. And we've looked at talking to a number of artists, one of whom is Jan Levy, who's an up-and-coming artist who's got quite a significant following now, whose pieces sell for upwards of several hundred to several thousand pounds. But we've also got a couple of artists who are doing works that are far more affordable. But the significant thing is there's just a representation of some of the art that we will have eventually, which is all for sale, and of which a significant percentage, so between 25 and 50% of the sale proceeds will be going to Pure Thought as an organisation. So it's one of the ways, alongside things like I used to work in branded merchandise, and one of the bottled water manufacturers agreed with us to do some bottles and a steriliser. So we'll be selling bottled water, but it'll be very honest, and it'll say this is a wonderfully sterilised bottle containing tap water, and that way you get a refreshing drink and we get more of the profits. Because anyway, there are little things that we'll be doing, but essentially the space we're in is going to be crucial to that, and you'll hear more about that soon. So should I crack on?
Yeah, crack on.
Okay, right. So we came up with these, what we call 8 pillars of our mental health offering. And they really were designed to look at the things we need to change, the things where we need to offer support, where we need to work with existing organisations to fill a void, to actually provide a solution. The first one I've talked a little bit about, and that's education. And really within education, it's across the board. It's education to GPs. So we're working, my mother who's in the room happens to used to run a GP training organisation. What was it actually called? It was called,
It was GP training.
Right, okay. And one of the trustees of the organisation that we have is a GP. It's deliberately arranged so that we can try and actually influence there, because GPs are the front line of the health system. They're the first person that you go to. So helping to re-educate them, helping to give them options that they can pass on to their patients is really important. But it's also about education into schools, education to university students. It's a very big pillar, and I won't try and go into all of it now. But the first pillar is education. And we've kind of come up with this strapline, which is the differentiation of psychiatry versus psychology, because so many people think, well, am I referred to psychology or psychiatry? And really helping people understand where the benefits come, and actually really realising that it's about a holistic approach is a really important thing. So that's education. The next one I'm not going to go too into. We've called it development. It's simply because we are in the process of trying to identify a number of strategies that can develop this and actually look to develop things to grow. And it needs to be one of the 8 pillars, because as we look to roll this out to actually work with other NHS trusts around the country and actually affect real change, we need to look at that. And whether it's Andy, who sat here, who's part of a big effort to actually change the mental health system from within the NHS currently, we need to know, we need to go through an awful lot of case studies, an awful lot of so-called clinical trials to start getting the credibility. And whilst in the States and in Canada, 3 principles is used tremendously, and even here within the area where the 3 principles works the most is within the criminal justice sector. And we've got one of the people coming to the AGM will be talking about that. But really development is about looking at how we roll this out, how we develop as an organisation. The third pillar we've called understanding, because probably the biggest problem that affects all of us when we're either going through a mental health difficulty or we've got a loved one or a friend that's doing that, it's understanding what they're actually going through. For the person who's actually going to work every day and has done for a few years, a decade, or a few decades, and suddenly finds himself having thoughts of suicidal ideation, as we'd refer to it technically, but thoughts that really life isn't worth living anymore, it's lost its spark, and that can very quickly deteriorate and get to a point where they're in a very unwell place. Helping people actually understand that and understand what mental health really is. And I'll just touch on a campaign that people have heard of Time to Change because it's been the most well-funded mental health initiative in recent years. Time to Change has summed up its efforts to say it's trying to combat stigma. Some of you, probably all of you, have seen at some point one of the campaigns that they've done, and that's great work. But we've gone a little bit higher than that. I'm lucky enough to have worked with, in a field where I know a fair few supposed celebrities. I don't buy into that, but we've looked at the fact that actually mental health is not really a nice thing. And beating down stigma is all well and good when you watch the advert on TV and the guy pops up and someone says, oh, that's Frank, or whatever his name is, and he's been off with a mental health problem, or he's been off with depression. And he looks well, he looks happy. But unfortunately, mental health doesn't look that way. And what is so important is actually getting people to realise that the person on the street who looks unwashed, unshaven, totally disconnected is a person just like them. We are all only a few weeks away of not looking after ourselves, of not shaving, of not showering, of looking like the hobo on the street. And actually understanding that that hobo on the street is probably a very successful person at some point in their life and has just as much right to life as we do, and actually seeing what's beyond the facade. So actually, when we talk about understanding, it covers quite a wide range of areas. But part of it is also to try and encourage people and look at initiatives that we can do with other organisations to really go beyond just beating the stigma and actually helping people understand what someone they may know is going through. We had someone, I'll just share one story. We had someone phone up, I do quite a bit of online mentoring, and phone up an organisation that I was asked to take a call a few months ago. And it was a young lady in her 20s who did not know what to do. She couldn't bear being in the presence of her friend who she knew was terribly unwell. But she couldn't do it, she couldn't deal with it. And so the only way she could do it was to walk away and just kind of distance herself. And I use that as an example because there's so many people we don't know how, if we've never been through it, or we've never had some training, or we've never had some help to really know what's going on, how to connect with that person that you might see walking down the street, talking to themselves, or just absolutely isolated and as tense and as stressed as can be. We're not very good as a society at actually connecting with that person. So understanding is a major, major pillar, and I'll talk more about that later. But I'm very excited about the next one because it's kind of to do with what we are here. So the next 3 pillars we have identified as being areas that we really want to involve Barnet Voice in from day one. Because they all connect with something that Barnet Voice either does at the moment or has significant experience in. And so we call the next pillar delivering. So we've had, this is the 4th, we've had education, we've had development, we've had understanding, and now we talk about delivering. And really, as I try and read the very small print that I wrote down, I wrote these things so I should know. But we talk about, and on the website you'll see it's in development, and Phil will talk about the website later, but very briefly, it's about getting psychological help out there. And that doesn't have to be purely through a psychologist. Joachim, without putting you on the spot, I don't believe you've done a psychology degree, have you? No. And yet Joachim works, and some of you know him in this room, as far more than a care coordinator in his fundamental role. He does an awful lot, and the psychologists in the Dennis Scott unit vouch for him and say if you can get Joachim as your caseworker because he actually does a dual role with you, okay? There are so many people who can do this, and whether it's Joachim's training through Hearing Voices Network or it's people who are going through the Free Principle Professional Institute, it's about explaining to people how we can actually help people as other people. And it doesn't just mean service users, but service users are a big part of it. So delivering for us is about rolling out a psychological therapy on a wide scale. As I say, the most exciting thing we're working on is working with a blue chip company who recognises at the moment they don't have a real offering, and for them to put a little bit of money in and be able to offer any of their staff access to psychological therapy when they know it's not going to be a dragging on process. It's a 2 to 6 session initial project, and that really does affect change. That is a huge part of what we're doing. But also in this space and in Temple Fortune in Cocoon, we were able to run intensives. We're also able to run intensives in hospitals with the blessing of their psychiatrists or psychologists that they're working under. So this is about delivering. And it's also something that with Barnet Voice, what we see is Barnet Voice, whilst it's all encompassing, it does run support groups, it does have space to be's that operate at the moment on a Monday and Friday where people can actually go in and it's a drop-in centre essentially. If we could look to train a number of service users that were interested, that wanted to learn more, a better understanding that helped them actually know that there's a backup in what they're doing when they're actually talking to people. That's a way that ultimately, when we don't have the money in the community at the moment, that we can actually get a very well rooted psychological therapy out there in a wider way. So that's delivering. And it ties so well into pillar number 5, which is mentoring, because we put under mentoring peer support and advocacy, which is a significant part of the work that Barnet Voice does. Jose, perhaps if you want, I'm happy to carry on, but if you want to talk about something, okay. But Jose worked as an advocate and knows the limitations. Claire at the back also worked as an advocate. And the interesting thing is, an advocate, by definition, by training, really can only actually represent what the patient wants to do. It's very difficult for them to get advice. It's very difficult for an advocate to that comes on. It does. But this is peer support and advocacy. Yes. But basically, sorry. Don't throw me off my train of thought. Basically, it's that mentoring role. I talked about it earlier. So the next one, because that's really can be done in a number of different ways. It can be done with people who are in hospital. It can be done with people who are in the community. But it links so nicely to such support. So mentoring is fantastic. Actually having an individual that can mentor you, that can actually help on your journey, give you time that professionals sadly can't. But support is something
that...
Can
I just stop you there? I haven't quite understood. If you're calling it mentoring, I understand. Peer support, I understand. I don't understand the mentoring, peer support and advocacy. Where does the advocacy? I've lost that.
So really what we've done, and that's why exactly why Jose stopped me. Because, okay, so number 5 is mentoring. And it's
mentoring and support.
And it's as an individual. It's as an individual rather than or as a group like Barnet Voice, rather than through the next one, pillar 6, is support. Okay, under support.
Should I just help Elsie on the advocacy?
Yeah.
Okay, so talk about
that fit in?
Well, when one is a mental health advocate employed by an organisation to deliver mental health advocacy, one actually learns that there are strict principles. There's something they call the advocacy cycle, that you engage and then you develop a plan and then you go and engage with the professional, whatever it might be. And that when you're working as an advocate in that sort of narrow employed role, there are specific rules that you have to go by, which Johnny was starting to allude to, which is that you're not allowed to really be proactive in the way that you actually advocate for somebody. So it's about saying, what is it, very simply you're told, what you have to do is say, what is it that you want, I'll help you to say it. And that's as far as really it is supposed to go when one is an employed mental health advocate. And if you're an independent mental health advocate, which is a slightly separate role, the additional thing you can do is you can give information about the Mental Health Act. So you can give information about the Mental Health Act, and then you say to the person, what do you want to do? I'll help you to say it. That's as far as you can go when you're an employed advocate. What we're saying advocacy should be, and we'll come to that when we talk about a later pillar, which is where it's wrapped up with a more legal role. What we say that an advocate should be is somebody who's much more proactive, who can call, as I have done when I was a mental health advocate for Mind in Barnet, who can call on their personal experience as a peer, as a service user, and find that not only are they actually going through the process of saying what is it you want and how can I help you to say it, but actually also offering support in a more holistic way to say, well actually let me also tell you a little story about somebody that I know, e.g. me, let me give you some assistance in telling you that this isn't an experience that is necessarily going to last. And so it's about bringing advocacy into a more holistic role rather than just being a narrow role of an advocate, so that when that person may need assistance and support in, let's say, engaging with professionals, which is what mental health advocates do, they have the additional support and understanding that somebody has helped them help them to know what it is that they want to say, because that person has been a peer themselves and can offer them not just a voice, but also support, but also examples. So it's about combining that role and not just being a narrow advocate. And that's what we think is something new and different, because it's not really, it's not something you're allowed to do. And so, for instance, when I did it, or when Claire did it, when she was an advocate at Mind Barney, Claire sitting in the back, we knew that we were actually stepping out of role when we were doing that. Let's not step out of role, let's actually make it our role to be a peer advocate and a mentor and a supporter all at the same time.
And in fairness to Jose, for anyone that's concerned, when he says it's something you're not allowed to do, it's not that you're not allowed to do it. It's not the way it's the way the current conventional system works. So recently, and just take this case only as recently as last week, I went in as the pure